the normal human, if so to speak, is self-interested but not greedy, right? So they look out after themselves, but just in terms of when they're trading with others. With the centralized state, you start to get people who are greedy in the sense that they want to take things from other people without giving anything back in return, right? So it's more of a theft than a trade situation.
I sat down with Robert Wright, historian and senior fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research. We talked H.G. Wells, Socialist Darwinism, the potential future of our species, and Leonardo DiCaprio. Join us for this two-part conversation.
The big picture is that we lived with a great big market and a small government, and that's how we evolved. And that brought selective pressures to bear, by which I mean, evolution by means of natural selection, for people who are intelligent and articulate and who can think for themselves so that they can function in this environment of lots of market transactions and a very small state.
In this piece that you've written, Socialist Darwinism, you're basically talking about, through a really unique lens, actually, how we have, of course, the nature versus nurture debate, which many people have now said, well, of course, it's a mix of both. This is how we've evolved. And then you go on to say that because of what you just said, we've evolved to be people who are actually quite independent. And so that those are features that have kind of stayed among humanity and kind of where we're at now. But then there's also some opposing forces to that, which you say the last 5,000 years, we've been living under
the opposite, more of a big state, small market situation.
And this is fascinating. Not many people, I was not aware of this. So can you maybe get into that and what kind of outcomes we see there?
Well, in terms of selection outcomes, instead of there being selection, and instead of people who are intelligent, self-thinking, independent folks being selected for, by which I mean that they're more likely to live to maturity, to sexual maturity, and to actually have offspring. For the last 5,000 years or so, especially in the urban civilizations from Ur to the Inca and all the way up to to the present, the selective pressures are more for people who are either very aggressive in taking rents, taking resources from other people, or people who are very, very passive and who are happy to accept the domination of others, just so long as they have enough where they can, eke out a few children. And what's been lost is the original human, the human that was, an independent thinker, the one who had to problem solve for themselves, the one who was heavily engaged in market activities, and the ones who were not under, a lot of direction from some central state.
And would that be kind of what we've seen with the hunting and gathering and the tribal communities? And is that kind of what you're talking about there?
Yeah, well, the few remaining hunting and gathering societies are, closer to what the human species lived under for those millions of years as we evolved. So you have people who are, they're more inner directed than other directed. They look to internal compasses about their behavior, and they're not worried about what other folks are saying about them so much, because they live too close to the margin of life and to the margin of reproduction. because not only do you have to live to sexual maturity, you also have to live well enough that you're physically able to reproduce.
So these are things that, sorry to kind of, I just want to cap that a little bit. Okay. So what we have here is that we're seeing, if we look at the big picture, you have these millions of years of society where they're, smaller groups, where their basic survival is based upon them reproducing and having these close-knit communities where they're self-governed.
And it means right. And it means being smart.
Yeah.
Being able to trade
and
to
mentally
think for
healthy in a sense
themselves.
as well.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you see about 5,000 years ago. So this is, it's interesting actually, because this is when, there was obviously a shift and people started to centralize, right? They started to create cities, and that probably was happening around trade and around, what was that? Where was that?
Well, and agriculture is usually blamed, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But what kind of?
So there are all kinds of hypotheses.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's all kinds of hypotheses about why. I mean, the where we pretty much know. It's in Mesoamerica and in Mesopotamia, Southeast Asia is where we first start to, to see these centralized states asserting more and more authority, and it's grown and grown and grown until we get to the 20th century with places like, the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. But I mean, even in the last 1,000 years or so, we've seen many authoritarian states in places like Europe. And Africa and Central America and Central Asia and so on and so forth, exerting, a different selective pressure that's bifurcated, right? So the normal human, if, so to speak, is self-interested but not greedy, right? So they look out after themselves, mm-hmm. but just in terms of when they're trading with others. With the centralized state, you start to get people who are greedy in the sense that they want to take things from other people without giving anything back in return, right? So it's more of a theft than a trade situation.
Interesting. So we've kind of like turned towards this dog eat dog culture.
Well, there's some selective pressure for people to behave in that way because they can be very reproductively successful. So, there's an old joke that most men, descended from Western Europe are all from Charlemagne because he was so prolific, sexually.
I didn't know that, but that makes sense, right? And so that's kind of leaked into we always look at things and say, men basically were sexually promiscuous, and this is what led them to spread their seed, so to speak.
Right.
And but maybe if I'm understanding correctly, that was happening juxtaposed with civilizations developing around cities and around this new model of centralization.
Right. So, most men want to spread their seed widely, but only the most powerful men have the actual ability to do so.
Okay.
Right. And I'm sure you've seen Braveheart and know a little bit about Prima Nocte and all that stuff. So powerful men tend to use that power not just to increase their wealth, but also to increase their access to reproductive females, right? Usually the youngest, most attractive ones end up, if not in outright harems, as in some cultures, then in these sort of serial trysts or mistresses.
So this would explain
happen over time.
The celebrity phenomenon of a lot of these, right? Like these kind of Leonardo DiCaprio types.
Once upon a time in Hollywood, nearly 3 hours long, Leonardo DiCaprio attended the premiere, and by the end, his date was too old for him. So,
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
So you have natural selection going towards men who are very aggressive in terms of seizing resources that they haven't really paid for on the one hand.
Yeah.
But you also have selection on the other hand towards what some people call sheeple, right? Towards just the passive. You accept the exploitation, not if it gets too bad, because if it gets too bad, then you're going to die or you're not going to reproduce at all. And that tends to cause social problems. But if you can have a kid or two, and then you're just content with that, and you don't put up a fuss, you learn not to think independently, even though it's probably ingrained in your genes. But there are all these institutions that we call schools, for example, that teach you conformity, how not to think independently, to listen to authority. And some people, due to that nurture, that the nature of following that nurture starts to be selected for.
Now,
and over 5,000 years, it's not enough to change the species yet, but there are signs perhaps that we are tending in this sort of situation where if this continues for hundreds of thousands of years, or is exacerbated by social policies like eugenics, that we could very well end up with an H.G. Wells sort of situation where we've speciated and we have a species of predator, Morlocks, not descended from the working class like Wells suggested, but are descended from what we today call the political class, and then a group of Eloi or sheeples or basically domesticated humans that it's inbred in their genes, just like for a cow or a sheep or any other domesticated animal, to follow the commands of the Morlocks.